So essentially, what fiscal sponsorship is and why it's important is an existing nonprofit taking its nonprofit status, tax exempt 501c3, you've heard of these terms, and extending that to include another project or another organization's work that is in alignment with the mission of that nonprofit. So all of the work that's done under that fiscal sponsorship relationship is now tax exempt and is not needing to set up a new nonprofit that's got to file with the IRS, the Franchise Tax Board, the Secretary of State, and various other entities and compliance steps. All that is kind of skipped and just flowed into one existing nonprofit. And the reason that's important is because, one, that can be a lot of effort, not just to set it up, but the ongoing maintenance of that can take a lot of time. And it's actually been found through some studies that new nonprofits and new projects can spend up to 15 to 25% of their annual budget just on things like accounting and payroll and HR and all of these various back-end things that fiscal sponsorship handles. And so it's both saving money, but also saving the important time, letting people focus on their mission. The simplest way to understand fiscal sponsorship is that you get to focus on your mission. A lot of the back-end work, the administration, the payroll, all of that stuff is being handled by an existing nonprofit that's already built up all of that infrastructure, built up all those systems, and is now sharing that infrastructure with you. So now you all are in this partnership. You still are the owner and the leader and the director, etc., of the project that you're leading. But as far as the IRS is concerned, as far as all these government entities are concerned, you don't need to build that relationship with them because you're partnering with an existing organization and you can get right to work. So it's a really important consideration for any project or organization. What stage are we in, and is fiscal sponsorship the right fit for us? The two most common scenarios are, one, newer projects that have a budget, that maybe they've been promised funding from a foundation or a donor. They're setting things up and getting things going, and they really want to be able to just focus on that work and not have to now deal with all of this new overhead of running an organization and all of the legal and financial backend of that. Or an organization that already exists, but may not have or want to have all of the added staff and people and relationships and contractors, etc., that are necessary to manage a lot of that backend work. So basically, one thing for you to consider is, are we at a scale and are we operating at a level where we actually need to hire all of our own back-end administrative staff in order to operate? Or do we want to keep things simple, work with a fiscal sponsor? And sometimes at a later stage, when an organization, let's say, reaches a multi-million-dollar annual budget, then it makes sense to be hiring multiple people and building all of that back-end. So organizations will be fiscally sponsored with budgets anywhere from 10 to 20,000, all the way up to 1, 2, and even up to 5 million of their budget, depending on what kind of setup makes the most sense for them. And the other thing to also think about is how many people are on the staff or on the team. So some projects have a big budget, but they have a very small team because a lot of that money is going into the direct services. And so again, the overhead of hiring more people is an important consideration of whether or not fiscal sponsorship would be a good fit for you. So when it comes to the benefits of having a fiscal sponsor, the first one is you now have access to tax deductible donation, and you have access to foundation funding. So a lot of organizations that give grants, that give donations, and a lot of individuals that give donations, they either have to or want to make sure that those donations are tax deductible, or those dollars are already set aside only for 501c3 nonprofits. So when you're fiscally sponsored, the work that you're doing is now able to receive those kinds of donations. The second thing is, often funders will like to give that money and give those grants to pre-established organizations, because those organizations have, let's say, for example, Holistic Underground, for the last 10 years, been doing work, been filing their taxes with the IRS, have been in compliance, have not had any issues. And so it creates a sense of trust for donors in many cases to know that they are dealing with an organization that already has been established and has been around for a long time. A lot of the time with fiscal sponsors, they're also adding you to a community. So they might be making important introductions to partners, collaborators, even funders that are in their network. And so now you're not just at it alone, but you're part of a community or a network of people with a similar mission. Because in order to be fiscally sponsored, it's important that that project's mission is in alignment with the mission of that existing nonprofit so that it can be considered a fiscal sponsor relationship. So those are some of those benefits. When deciding whether or not to be fiscally sponsored and who to be fiscally sponsored by, one of the most important considerations for any project is what are the fees and what are the costs. So the first thing that's important to understand is the two forms of fiscal sponsorship, which are Model C and Model A. So Model C fiscal sponsorship is the simplest form. Some people think of it as like pass-through fiscal sponsorship. where basically whoever the donor is, whether it be a foundation or an individual that's giving that money is received by the nonprofit on behalf of the fiscal sponsor, so that whoever is donating to a 501c3 and getting the tax write-offs and whatever that they need. And that money is then turned around and dispersed to the project. That fiscal sponsor is still responsible for filing taxes on all of that money and making sure that the project is in compliance with the laws and all of these things. But essentially, the project is operating individually and is legally separate. So usually this means that it's not going to be covered by the nonprofit's insurance. If it has employees, those employees are going to be employed by the organization itself, whether that be an LLC or an individual or whatever it is. An important consideration with Model C fiscal sponsorship is you have to work with your tax preparer to make sure that those funds that you receive are not being claimed as income. So that's just an important thing for you to think about if you're choosing Model C. Model C, of course, is going to be less expensive, and it can range anywhere from 3% to about around 8%, depending on the organization you work with and what you're getting with that relationship. With Holistic Underground, we're about in the middle at 6% for Model C. Model A fiscal sponsorship, which is more like full service, right? You're getting a lot more. That's when all of the back end is basically handled by the nonprofit fiscal sponsor. So this includes payroll of any employees that you've hired, including yourself as the leader of the project, the payments that are made to contractors. All of the money lives in the nonprofit and it never actually touches the bank account of the individual or LLC. So it's never going to be something you have to worry about when you're filing your taxes. All the taxes, compliance, everything is handled by the nonprofit. You're going to get a debit card from the nonprofit account, but it has your project's name on it. So you can do all of the spending and expenses directly from that account. You'll have your own bank account within the nonprofit's bank account system, and that will allow you to log in, see how much money you have, what you've raised, where you're at with your budget. And that nonprofit fiscal sponsor, at least in our case, but in many others as well, is going to actually have an in-house bookkeeper or someone that's working with you to check on your budget, to make sure that things are being categorized correctly so you can see, okay, how much have we spent in this? How much have we spent in that? And then when it's time to report to your grant funders or whoever it is, that can then be turned into a fiscal report with the help of the fiscal sponsor as well. And there might be other benefits as well, like we talked about earlier, whether that be a network of other resources that this fiscal sponsor is going to provide. What makes Holistic Underground a little bit different than other fiscal sponsors? So fiscal sponsorship with Holistic Underground is going to be a little different than any other fiscal sponsorship you're going to come. And it really comes down to who we work with, how we work with them, what you're getting, and of course, what is the bigger picture and the bigger mission of why we do what we do. So we started as a nonprofit that was doing a lot of community service work from the very beginning about 10 years ago. And we also had done a lot of organizational development consulting. So we worked with nonprofits and even companies to help them build their strategies, build their budgets, do their HR, do their DEI, do their back-end operations. So we really learned what does it take to actually operate an organization and do so effectively. And this wisdom has kind of merged itself into how we do fiscal sponsorship. And we've been very selective about who we curate into our community of fiscally sponsored partners. These tend to be organizations that are visionary and are really trying to change the game. They're not just trying to solve a problem and kind of put a band-aid over something, but they really have a dream or a vision for the world or for their community that is really rooted in making a difference in the long term. They tend to be led by leaders who are people of color, who are coming from very diverse backgrounds or are working with diverse communities. They tend to come from people who have a very big shared value around an approach that takes into consideration healing, takes into consideration that we're not just here to get numbers, but we actually want to heal our society, heal the relationships between each other. There might be a spiritual aspect to the work that they're doing. There might be creative or a cultural aspect to the work that they're doing, but it's really this holistic approach at making change. That's why we're called Holistic Underground. So when you work with us, you're going to be in a network and actually probably get to meet some really amazing organizations that are doing work that's values aligned with you. How we work with them is a lot more hands-on than the average fiscal sponsor. So a lot of fiscal sponsors, you're going to be emailing with them. You might hear back from them a couple of days later, but you're not going to really meet the entire team and really have a relationship with a lot of the members of that fiscal sponsor. And we really make it a point to, at least on a quarterly basis, get to check in with our projects. You get to actually meet with the bookkeeper and talk to that person about your budget and how things are going. We actually help people. They just send us random questions. We do research for them. We have a back-end team that is just providing some added support. And actually, Holistic Underground, in addition to being a fiscal sponsor, is also two other things. One, consulting agency. So we have a lot of resources and tools that we've developed for our consulting clients, strategic planning documents and budget templates and every template under the sun that we provide to our sponsored projects for free. And we're also a capacity building agency. So we have an in-house team of media workers who do social media, they build websites, they do brands. And so a lot of our partners end up working with us to actually help them with these other things as well. And even if we don't do all of that for them, we again might have templates or resources from everything from invoices to fancy letterheads and these kinds of things that come in really handy for especially a new organization that's just getting their project off the ground. So we really believe that it takes a village to change the world, and that's kind of our motto. We like to think of ourselves as just like it takes a village to raise a child. We are that expanded network that really is necessary for real change to occur, and building that community of values aligned impact that we all need to reach our highest potential.